Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to explore with you a range of ideas that you should consider when choosing your geographical topic area that you wish to investigate. And you'll find alongside this tutorial, there is the document itself, which I would strongly recommend you read through entirely and consider each of the possible project areas that are in this document as possible things that you could study. I also recommend that you take notes as you read through this and write down the topic areas that interest you. And then at the end, you can prioritize them into possible first, second, third places. That's an important step because when it comes to the next tutorial, which is going to look at writing your proposal, you'll need to have really thought about a topic area, what you plan to study within that topic area. And that might also be backed up with a conversation you have with your teacher in regards to what the topic might involve and possible research questions that will flow from a central aim. Okay, let's get cracking. Let's think about what are the key things to think about when it comes to selecting a topic. So at the moment, you may have an idea about an area of geography that you're quite interested in. That might come from something you studied at higher or something in years previous. You may have done some field work in previous years that might also influence your choice, and that's all perfectly acceptable. You must bear in mind, however, that a topic area that you have studied has got to have the academic rigor and weight of an advanced higher level. And there are certain project areas that we may have studied in your earlier years at Morrison's that might not really be suited to a rigorous advanced higher project area. It's very likely you are going to choose a topic that primarily is what we might call physical geography, or possibly one that we might call human geography. And that you may have a preference in one of those two areas of geography. There is a substantial crossover between the two fields of geography in that human beings influence the natural world and the natural world influences humans. So really depending on your project, it might be a blend of both areas of geography, or it might more be one area entirely. The topic you pick will then have a significant influence in terms of where you're going to have to go to gather the data. So, for example, if you were to do a river-based investigation, you would have to have rivers available to you. The type of data you'll get, and that also then influences how you process that data. So, physical geography projects, broadly speaking, are very good on getting numerical data, whereas human geography projects tend to be more survey-based. And gather data in different ways. Now, that is very broad, and that's a generalization. But the type of data you gather on your field trip that you will conduct later this term does then influence how you present it, the types of maps, graphs, and charts you're going to use to present that data, and also how you analyze it. And no doubt with your teacher, there will be some conversation about this in regards to what you've chosen. Where you live also plays a role. Most students tend to do a topic area that is in an area close to where they live, which allows them to easily access their data gathering, and they can return repeatedly. That shouldn't be the only factor you consider, however, because you may have the opportunity to travel far beyond where you live for various reasons. And if it's appropriate and you'd like to do that, then don't be limited to the context being linked to where you live. So, for example, if you live in a very remote area in the mountains, it might naturally lend itself to a piece of physical geography on a mountain, on soil or rivers, or forests. However, you might strongly want to do some urban geography in a big city, which would involve you having to travel. But you must bear in mind that you need to be able to do that either by yourself or with assistance of your parents. Also, does your topic require specialist equipment? That is something you're going to have to consider. You may have available to you equipment because of what maybe your parents do for a living that you will allow you to do certain types of geography projects that would otherwise not be within the realms of possibility to do with what the department has. The department does have equipment, specialist equipment for a range of topics, and you'll need to discuss if there is specialist equipment you required, whether you need the department to provide it or whether you can access it yourself, or maybe whether it's actually a barrier to completing the topic. Another thing to consider, and it is a factor that does influence some students, you are likely starting to think about what you want to study at university. And therefore, you might like to choose a topic area that's in some way matched to the type of course or degree area that you are studying. So, for example, in the past, we've had a student who wanted to study law, and they did a criminology-based project based on people's perceptions of crime and the death penalty and other things of that nature. So their geography project had that kind of dimension to it, and they chose it because they were planning on studying it. However, the time when you pick your degree, your course, your topic area, be mindful of the fact that you may not have actually settled upon what you're actually planning to study at university. Uh, right, finally, there are lots of possible geography projects that are not on the pages that follow. And it's important that you feel free to choose something entirely of your own design. So, for example, we have had a student study the location of coffee shops in 3 contrasting settlements and explored the changing demographics of coffee drinking, looking at how different ages and genders drank coffee and whether that changed in recent years, and how there's been an explosion in the cafe culture in the United Kingdom. So that is not on the list below, but it was a very interesting piece of geography, well researched and well executed. More recently, we've had students study last year on the impact of COVID-19 on local shops and how they had adapted in light of the pandemic. So that was very topical. I've now included that on the list below, but something that's very topical to the changing world we live in is relevant. We've had students study people's national stereotypes of each other from people, and they had access to data from other countries in order to examine how people viewed people from other countries. And we've also had somebody study people's changing attitudes towards climate change and climate science, and how urgent they think the climate debate and the climate issue is. So those are more to do with behavioral geography and cultural geography. And that's it's a very popular area of geography today, especially in degree courses that focus in on human geography, is these changing attitudes and behaviors of people and their environments and how they are influenced by their environments. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, psychology or anything like that, then there might be something you specifically want to explore. It reminds me a bit of the student who was very interested in she was doing an art degree, but she was also did advanced high geography, and she had an interest in graffiti art. So she went down to Glasgow and did a geography project on graffiti and how people felt about graffiti and how they felt about different graffiti styles. And she did it across different urban landscapes, in different areas with different age groups and genders. So it very much became a geography project, although it was born out of her interest as an artist in that particular area of geography. Right, what now follows is a set of suggestions. That is all they are. And what I would suggest you do is read through every single one, and in your project jotter, make a note of the ones that interest you. Maybe scribble down some of your own ideas you have as you think about them. And when you have completed this, maybe rank them in order of how likely you think you'd be interested in doing them. And that will be an important step in preparing yourself for tutorial 3, which will be coming up with your project proposal. So just how to do that. So for example, here we have one of the most standard types of geography project is a river investigation. There are lots of different types of river investigations. In higher geography, you will have completed a river investigation as part of your course, and that was a downstream changes in a river. And so this first idea here very much is a reprisal of that. Obviously, because it's advanced higher, we would need to add an extra level of rigor to it. So it wouldn't just be 2 research questions and whether the Bradshaw model was accurate or not. It would have to include some other areas. It might have to include 2 rivers or a longer stretch of river, more sampling, and a more rigorous investigation of the accuracy of Bradshaw's model if you were to take on this type of study. But that is one that you will be very familiar with. What you'll see now, if you just read through at your own pace, is lots of other types of river investigations. So what I'd suggest you do is pause this now and read through all of these different physical geography projects, which I'm scrolling down through. See if there's any that interest you. So for example, here's the beach studies are similar. Some of these will be very similar to what you will have conducted on Thamesmere Beach, so that'll be familiar to you. Forestry-based projects, they're very popular and quite easy to conduct with easy to access data. Footpath study, you'll remember back from National 5, you will have completed some field work on footpath erosion studies. Developments and how they impact on people. There's always one or two students every few years do a project of that nature. And microclimates and weather, as well as pebble studies. All of these are valid physical geography projects. Take your time and pick out of this either the title or maybe something within it that you've read that you think you might be interested to study. And then when you've done that, come back and I'll talk you quickly through human geography. Okay, I'm assuming you've had a good look through the physical geography projects and you've maybe picked out a pebble study or maybe a pebble study dimension. You maybe want to look at the influence of longshore drift on contrasting beaches in Western Scotland, for example. That might be something that interests. Maybe you go on holiday somewhere with lots of different pebble beaches and you want to see if longshore drift is more impactful on beaches facing certain directions than others. Human geography projects are very different. They generally speaking, often take longer to do if done well. They can be very quickly delivered, but generally the ones that are quite quick are not so good. They do require very large data sets, and more often than not, that requires a degree of surveying of people. That's not true of all urban geography projects, and within here you will find ones that certainly don't require you to have to do any surveys whatsoever. And there are different ways you can do surveys, whether that's face-to-face on a street, whether that's mailing people through their doors, or whether that's through online surveys. But the key to a good human geography project is the number of samples you take, so the number of bits of data you gather. Now, by far the most common are urban studies. And urban studies don't have to be cities, they can be towns or even villages to an extent. Some of these studies, like changing central business districts, aren't obviously possible in towns and villages because they don't really, villages, because they don't really have CBDs. But in a town or in a city, they certainly are possible. And I would take your time to have a look down all the different urban possibilities. Within each of these, there are projects in their own right. So one of these could actually be multiple projects. And each of these ideas, for example, what you can investigate, these are each projects in their own right when it comes to property values, for example, of urban areas. Here we have behavioral science and how changes are affecting our high streets. Now that could be changes in online shopping or the impact of the pandemic changing shopping behaviors. So that's a very contemporary study. Rural land studies, if you live in a rural environment, there's some really good projects here. They're really good for tourism in villages or towns. And there's a lot of tourist-based projects that have been done in Crieff in the past. Transport studies. Recent studies, for example, have looked at the influence of different traffic management strategies used in different towns and villages to control traffic speeds and how effective they are. Was a study done a few years ago. Crime studies, retail studies in shops, also very popular retail studies. So spend your time having a little look at the different possibilities there. And finally, population-based studies. And population studies can obviously also underpin all of the other studies that you just looked at. So take your time to read through them and make down a note of any of those that are of particular interest. Once again, now that you've finished and should have a list of at least 3 possible subjects, topic areas, there may be one that really you're passionate about or you're interested in, and it's very obvious to you, and that should be your number one and underlined and should form the basis of your proposal. However, you might be unsure about which one you want to do. So take your time, maybe discuss it with your teacher, what your thoughts are, and we'll be able to suggest how you might be able to tweak it. We might be able to consider where you live or give you some advice on other students that have done similar projects, and that might help you firm up one of your ideas. But you should have a set of notes about the type of studies you might be interested in, which may include obviously ones that are not on this list, but one you might be interested in.